بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونستعين ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله انتجبه لولايته واختصه برسالته وأكرمه بالنبوة وأشهد أن عليا ولي الله وأمينه في أرضه وحجته على عباده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم أوصيكم عباد الله وإياي بتقوى الله. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before I begin today's sermon, I admonish myself first and foremost before advising each and every one of you to adhere to the principles, to adhere to the disciplines of taqwa. When you examine the ayat of the Holy Quran, and there are many ayats of the Holy Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to speak about the qualities and the characteristics of the mu'min. And many of these verses often begin with these words in particular, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O those of you who believe. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to narrate or begins to identify certain qualities which are specific only for the believers. So for example, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu attaqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqin. O those of you who believe, adhere to taqwa and the principles of taqwa and be amongst those who are truthful. From amongst the other verses in the Quran, eat from the tayyibat, for example. Or when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the mu'min, He says that they are those who engage in amalun salih, that they are those who act righteously, that there are those who have, for example, and they speak nicely with people, they communicate with respect, with humility. And there are many verses in the Quran where Allah begins to identify the qualities of the mu'min. And of course, our responsibility is to try and adhere to these different qualities and attributes and try and integrate them within our lifestyle. But then beyond the ayats of the Holy Quran, when you enter the world of the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, you find that the Ahlul Bayt begin to speak about even more qualities which are specific to the believers, to those who believe, to the mu'mineen. So for example, there's one very famous hadith of Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam, when he approached one of his companions. He said that a mu'min is the one who has 5 specific characteristics, 5 specific symbols or alamat. He says alamatul mu'min khams. So the narrator, when he heard this, he said to the Imam, قُلْتُ وَمَا هُنَّ يَبْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. And what are these 5 qualities and characteristics? So the Imam begins to speak about certain characteristics which are not mentioned in the Quran. It's like an extension of the Holy Quran. So the Imam says the first of them is al-wara' fi khalwa, that when a person is isolated behind the 4 walls of his home in private, then he has control over his nafs, he has control over his desires. Yes, many a times when we go out in public, because of the people that are staring at us, because of the people that observe our actions and our words, there is a sense of authority when it comes to controlling our words and our actions. But when a person is private, you realize that this person is, or potentially could be, a very different person than what he is in public. So he says the first and foremost is al-wara' min khalwa was-sadaqatu fi qillati fil qillah. He says the second is when a person gives charity, even when he is in financial distress. So even if this person has little savings, for example, he does not stop giving charity. When you have a person who is affluent, when a person who is well-to-do, all of his financial needs are met, for him to give sadaqah is not an issue, it's not a problem. He can give as much as he wants. But when you find that a person is financially in distress, he's unemployed, for example, or he has very little savings, then sadaqah for him could be very hard. But the Imam alayhi salam says one of the alamat of a mu'min is that he gives sadaqah even when he is in financial distress. Number 3 He says, وَالصَّبْرُ عِنْدَ الْمُصِيبَةِ, and this person has patience in the time of calamities and adversities. وَالْحِلْمُ عِنْدَ الْغَضَبِ, and he has forbearance in the time of anger. He doesn't let his anger overpower his character, his identity. وَالصِّدْقُ عِنْدَ الْخَوْفِ, and he adheres to the truth, even though he knows that by uttering or speaking or behaving according to the truth will bring about fear for his life or fear in his affairs. So you find that this hadith of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, what he does is he goes beyond the principles of the Holy Quran, using the Quran as a base, as an authority. He adds on to the alamat of the mu'min, of course, as we said, as an extension to what is already mentioned in the Holy Quran. But there is one particular hadith of Imam Hassan al-Askari salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, where he goes on to speak on the alamat of the mu'min, which is different to what has been spoken of by Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. And this hadith is of course very, very popular, especially during these days, the days of the Arba'iniyya of Imam al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. In At-Tahdhib, for example, this hadith is mentioned. In Al-Wafi, this hadith is mentioned. And of course, many of the ancient texts that we base the foundations of our Sharia from. Imam Hassan al-Askari salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he says, alamat al-mu'mini khamsun. He says the alama of the mu'min are 5. What are these 5s? He says, number 1, salatu ihda wa khamsin. When a person engages in salah, how many rak'ah? 51 rak'ah throughout the day. Number 2 was ziyaratul arba'in, and the ziyarah of the 40th. Number 3, at-takhattum bil yamin, and when a mu'min wears a ring on his right hand, wa ta'firul jabin, and he rubs the cheeks or his forehead on the ground. Wal jahru bi bismillahir rahmanir rahim, and he calls out loudly. He recites the basmala in a loud voice. So allow us to examine what this particular hadith entails and what it means, because you realize that it has more of a political, religious connotation behind it, rather than just speaking merely about the alamat of the mu'min. So when you look at the first one, the recitation of 51 rak'ah is seen as one of the signs of the mu'min. 51 rak'ah. How is this total up? We have 17 rak'ah throughout the day, which are known as the fard or the fara'id, which are of course the salah, which are wajibat. Maghrib, Isha, Dhuhr, Asr and Fajr. These amount to 17 rak'ah. Beyond that, you find each and every one of these salah have mustahabbat associated with it, known as the nawafil or salat al-nawafil. So you find, for example, Fajr has 2 rak'ah, Dhuhr has 8 rak'ah, Asr has 8 rak'ah, Maghrib has 4 rak'ah, Isha has 2 rak'ah, then you have Salat al-Layl, which is 8 in total, and beyond that you have Shaf' and Watr, which is 3 rak'at in total. The nawafil of Salat al-Isha can be recited sitting down, which amounts to 2 rak'ah, or it can be recited standing up, amounting to 1 rak'ah. Altogether, 34 rak'at, which are known to be Salat al-Nawafil. When you add that onto the 17, which are considered to be mandatory, which are considered to be wajib, then you have 51 altogether in total. Now, why is this important? Why does Imam Hassan al-Askari begin to speak about the number of raka'at of a mu'min in specific? When we speak about a mu'min, when we speak about the one who has iman in his heart, here Imam Hassan al-Askari is coming from a very specific perspective. And that is that the meaning of iman is that this person believes in the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. And what he is explaining is, he's not explaining saying that these are the alamat of a mu'min, a person who believes in Allah and His Prophet, but rather he's going beyond that. He is saying that these are the alamat of the Shia Ithna Ashariya, the one who believes in the wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam specifically. And so when you look at the dialogue and the discussions amongst the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, you find that there are differences of opinion even amongst the 4 madhahib as to how many nawafil a person is to recite during the day. When you refer to their numbers of nawafil, it is different to our numbers of nawafil. If I'm not mistaken, the amount of nawafil that they are to recite during the day is less than the nawafil that we are to recite. And so Imam Hassan al-Askari here begins to examine, saying that a Shia, someone who is separately identified from the followers of the Sunnah, is the one who recites 51 rak'ah yawmiyya every single day, in the sense that he believes that 34 out of these 51 rak'ah are considered to be nawafil. And of course, this figure is different from the figure that has been administered by the scholars of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. When you look at Salah, Salah as described by the Prophet of Islam is Mi'raj al-Mu'min. It is a fundamental pivot in the religion of Islam. Amud ad-Din. It is the pillar of the religion of Islam. A person can reach spirituality, a person can reach governance of his own desires through Salah, as it is seen as an act of worship which cleanses the soul and ascends the soul towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the best ways to seek proximity towards God is through Salah. And of course, needless to say, we shouldn't limit ourselves to only the wajibat. Unfortunately, you find that there are people in the communities global communities, who don't even adhere to the wajibats, or they belittle the wajibat. Here you find that the A'imma alayhim as-salam is explaining that a mu'min is the one who constantly pushes himself to go beyond than what has been mandated, to go beyond what has been prescribed as compulsory. A mu'min is the one who constantly engages in salah. And you find that salah is that one particular act which has existed in every single law of all of the prophets that have come before us. Nabi Ibrahim established Salah, Nabi Ismail established Salah, Nabi Nuh, Nabi Musa, Nabi Isa, each and every single prophet of Allah adhered to the act of prayers. A person who wants to seek success in this world should also engage in prayers. Engage in prayers and see the success come into your life. So, one of the alamat of the mu'min is the one who adheres or believes strongly that there are 51 rak'ah to be recited every single day. 51 rak'ah. Number 2, وَتَخَتَّمُ بِالْيَمِينِ. And the one who, of course, wears the ring on his right hand. Now, why the right hand specifically? Is there any wisdom behind that? Of course, there is wisdom behind that. Do we know what the wisdom is? We may not know what that wisdom is. As in, someone may come forward and say, well, what's the difference between wearing the ring on the right hand and the left hand? Considering that both are the creation of God. Why does the right hand have importance over the left hand? We may not understand that. We may not understand the spirituality behind it. But as spoken of by the ulama, one of the reasons as to why we have been commanded or we have been advised to wear the ring on the right hand is because this is exactly what the Prophet of Islam used to do. مَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ. Whatever the Prophet has given you, take it. It is very well known that the Prophet used to wear the ring in his right hand. When you, for example, read the historical context of when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was in Masjid al-Nabi, and the beggar comes in and he begins to seek financial help from the companions and from the people that were there. When he approaches the Imam alayhi salam, the narrations say he stretched out his right hand. And he, of course, gave the ring that was there on his right hand. So you find that this is, of course, the sunnah of the A'imma alayhim as-salam. Beyond that, you realize that, hold on a second, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, even amongst the followers of the Bani Umayyah, they used to wear the ring on the left hand. And of course, we have works written by ulama of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah explaining and testifying that the Prophet also used to wear the ring on his right hand. And this became a culture amongst the Shia Ithna Ashariya. And then he specifically mentions, he says that because this has become the culture of the Shia Ithna Ashariya, we now need to follow a different sunnah, which is to wear the ring on the left hand. So you find that the A'imma alayhim as-salam, they used to wear the rings on their right hand, specific rings on specific finger of the right hand, and this continued from one imam to the other, and it was seen as the identity of the mu'min. In contrast to the identity of those who supported the Banu Umayyah, they would wear the rings on their left hand. Beyond that, you realize that amongst the opinion of the scholars, they came and they said that this is a political, or this was a very silent, hidden political movement amongst the Shias themselves. Now, of course, as you know, when you read the history of the A'imma alayhim salam, because of a lot of persecution, because of the amount of bloodshed that was there, existing in their times, anyone who was identified as the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt would automatically be a target. Needless to say, you could refer to the history of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, and beyond that, the Banu Umayyah, when they came, a lot of oppression was vented towards the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam and the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. And so, naturally, there was a hidden movement amongst the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt that because of taqiyya, where a person would hide his faith publicly and even privately in his own home, you realize that this situation was very hard for the mu'mins to get together and to, for example, commemorate the Aza of Imam Hussein, or to just sit and learn about the religion of Islam according to the teachings of the Ahl al-Bayt. It was difficult for them to meet up and to greet each other as the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt. They used to, obviously, because of the restrictions, they would not have the freedom that we, alhamdulillah, have today. And so it was very difficult for them to identify who exactly was the follower of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. But then amongst the hidden, the circles that existed, amongst the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt, the news spread that if you want to be considered as the follower of the Ahl al-Bayt, then wear a ring on your right hand. And without having to converse with anyone, without having to, for example, speak and discuss about your beliefs, just by seeing another fellow human being wearing a specific stone on a specific finger on the right hand would be an indication that that person is the follower of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. And this was a hidden movement that began during the times and the generations of the A'imma alayhim salam. So the identity of the mu'min is وَتَخَتُّمْ بِالْيَمِينِ, is to wear the ring on the right hand. Then you have, for example, beyond that, the third alama of the mu'min is ta'firul jabin. When the alama is shown on the forehead specifically, when the person begins to rub dust on his forehead during Salah or even outside of Salah. For example, when it is demonstrated in Sajdat al-Shukr. You find, for example, the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, when they go into Sujud, they don't perform Sujud on dust or on clay. Whereas with us, the followers of the Imamiyah, we adhere to it. Of course, the mustahab is that a person should perform Sujud on the sand or the turba of Karbala, as it is a land which is seen and considered to be muqaddasa, holy. And there are many benefits which are uttered by the A'imma alayhim salam, sujud on the stone or, for example, on the clay of Karbala. You realize that this is a demonstration of humility. It is a demonstration, it is the peak demonstration of humility and absolute submission towards Rabb al-Alameen. When a person who, for example, submits himself wholly in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he prostrates on dust, it is as if he is saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, on the day of judgment, allow this forehead of mine to shine. Allow me to be in the state of happiness when all other souls and all other individuals will be in the state of sadness. Beautiful hadith, of course, which we ought to remind ourselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala one day communicates with Nabi Musa. He says, O Musa, do you know why I have chosen you to be Kalimullah? A person who has such a strong, close proximity with your Lord. Musa turns around, he says, Ya Allah, no, explain to me, you would know best. He says, it is because I have seen your actions, and your actions are far greater than the actions of any human being in your society. And that is that you go into sujud. And when you go into sujud, you wipe the dust on your cheeks and on your forehead. This act in itself is something that I love. It is something that I adore. And of course, as the followers of the A'imma alayhim salam, we ought to do that. We ought to rub the turba, the muhr, on our foreheads, on our cheeks. This is something that Allah loves, when we humiliate ourselves completely towards Him. And of course, humiliation towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings about dignity in the eyes of the people. This is a beautiful relationship that we ought to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you want to have a dignified position in society, someone with izzah, then show humility towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, the fourth alama is when the Imam alayhi salam says, وَالْجَهْرُ بِبِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. And when a person calls out loudly, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. When you look at, for example, how the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah mention or recite their prayers, they don't recite the Basmala. Whereas we are advised to recite the Basmala. When it comes to Maghrib, Isha and Fajr, the recitation of the Basmala is wajib. Just as how the qira'ah of the two surahs are seen as wajib. Whereas when it comes to Salat al-Makhfi or Ikhfat, al-Asri wal-Dhuhr, you realize that although the qira'ah of the surahs are not as wajib, not to recite it with a loud voice or with a voice, the Basmala, it is mustahab to recite the Basmala with a voice, loudly, bil-jahri. Beyond that, not even just in Salah, even outside of Salah, you realize that every action that we ought to perform that action specifically with the recitation of the Basmala, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Interestingly enough, there's a very interesting saying of Fakhruddin al-Razi, Rahmatullah alayhi, one of the most esteemed scholars amongst the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, a profound personality, a profound scholar in his own right. He says that when it comes to the Jahar of the Basmala, every Sunni scholar doesn't believe in it. They don't see it to be something that is seen to be compulsory. Even the recitation of the Basmala is not needed within Salah. He says, but if you were to stick with the Madrak, if you were to stick with the sources that we have and the evidences that we have, there is no shadow of a doubt that Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam used to recite his salawat with the Basmala, and he would recite the Basmala loudly. He says, this is the evidence that we have. And the reason why I recite the Basmala in my Salah, Fakhruddin al-Razi testifies, he says that I, being a Sunni, I still recite the Basmala loudly in my Salah is because I follow the Sunnah of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Because the Holy Prophet has said that Ali is with the truth and the truth revolves around Ali. And based on this principle, I follow the Sunnah of Ali ibn Abi Talib and I recite the Basmala loudly in my Salah. So it's not just within Salah, but it's even outside of Salah in our ordinary actions. Beautiful dua that is mentioned within the Holy Quran when the Holy Prophet says, وَقُلْ رَبِّي أَدْخِلْنِي مُدْخَلَ صِدْقٍ وَأَخْرِجْنِي مُخْرَجَ صِدْقٍ وَاجْعَلْ لِي مِن لَدُنْكَ سُلْطَانًا نَصِيرًا. He says, Ya Allah, whenever I enter a particular action, allow me to enter that action with truthfulness, and when I exit that action, allow me to exit it with goodness. So let every action be an action of goodness when I enter and when I come out of that particular action. And finally, the fifth and the final alama of the mu'min is وَزِيَارَةُ الْأَرْبَعِينَ. Now, unfortunately, in this day and age, in these circumstances, we have not been given the opportunity to go for the ziyarah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Just recently, there was news that the borders have opened up, but only for a limited amount of people per country. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 1,500 people who are allowed to go and perform the ziyarat of Imam Hussein during these days of Arba'iniyah. Which means that some of us may have had the tawfiq to go towards the ziyarah, but many of us unfortunately have not been given that tawfiq. But the ziyarah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is not restricted physically, has not been limited physically. Our hearts, our minds, our thoughts, our emotions can link with Imam Hussein alayhi salam very easily. That's the power of the nafs, that's the power of emotions, that's the power of the mind. It cannot be limited physically. Our hearts, our prayers, our du'as, the ziyarah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam can be performed within our own homes. And the reason why this particular ziyarah, out of all of the ziyarats that we have of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and we have plenty, this ziyarah has a fadila. And that fadila is that the one who recites it has the alama, has the sign of being a mu'min. Why is that? The reason why that is because the content of this ziyarah is different from all the other ziyarat. And we'll speak about this later in the coming nights, inshallah. It is a wonderful ziyarah. It is a ziyarah which ought to be recited in a state of grief, in the state of weeping. The tears should roll from one's eyes. There should be grief for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. It is the perfect manifestation of tawalla wa tabarra. Tawalla and tabarra, you find it is manifested in the words of Ziyarat al-Arba'in. And of course, this is in perfect synchrony with the ayah of the Holy Quran. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرٍ إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةِ فِي الْقُرْبَى. I do not ask for any recompense except that there is love for my family. Tawalla tabarra is a perfect manifestation of this command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our amal during these nights, during these days, to allow us to ascend and seek proximity towards Him through Abu Abdullah alayhi salatu wassalam. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Before we end, a humble request to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all our marhumin. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha.